Hi, it's Irene and it's another dumpster diving story, so let's read what today's story brings to us. Silas Mercer was 65 and tired in the quiet way that doesn't show until the bills come out. He'd spent his whole life in a small Texas farm town fixing what other people gave up on tractors, balers, old pickups that just needed a little love. Now his own life felt like one long repair he couldn't finish. The roof over their little house leaked in two places, the tractor he used for side jobs needed a major overhaul, his savings had shrunk year after year until retirement meant watching prices rise faster than his check. And his wife, Martha, had started missing half of what people said unless they spoke up because the hearing aid the doctor recommended cost more than Silas made in months. So he did what men like Silas do when the pride meets panic. He worked around the edges. After supper, he'd drive behind the clothes repair shops and collect old batteries, copper wire, and scrap that people tossed like it was nothing. $200 here, $100 there, enough to keep the lights on, not enough to fix the real problems. Every time he counted change on the workbench, he told himself it was temporary. But the truth was simpler and uglier. He was running out of temporary. On Thursday in late spring, Silas stopped at the far end of town where a private machine shop sat dark behind a chain link fence. The owner had died a few months back, and the place had been closed for good, the kind of story folks whispered about and then forgot. Out back, near the dumpster, Silas saw something half buried under oily rocks and busted cardboard, a heavy lockbox, the kind a mechanic might use to keep tools from walking off. It was smeared with old grease, dented on one corner and plain enough to look worthless. But when Silas tried to lift it, his arms tensed. This wasn't empty. He stood there longer than he should have, listening to the quiet, looking at the fence like it might suddenly explain itself. He told himself to leave it. He also pictured Martha turning her head at the dinner table, smiling politely because she couldn't hear the punchline. That thought made his throat tighten. He slid the lockbox into his truck like it was just scrap metal, drove home, and carried it into his garage with the door shut. Silas didn't crack it open like a movie thief. He did what a mechanic does. He set it on a towel, braced it, and worked the stubborn latch with steady hands. When the lid finally popped, he expected old paperwork or rusted sockets. Instead, he saw velvet watch pouches, heavy and careful, and stacks of large old bills that looked like they belonged in a museum display. The kind of money you don't find, the kind of money you hide. And right there, with his hands hovering over a fortune that didn't make sense, Silas realized the worst part wasn't how much it might be worth. The worst part was knowing somebody somewhere would come looking for it, because things like this don't get thrown away by accident. Silas didn't tell Martha the first night, not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't trust the world. He slid the lockbox under an old welding blanket and sat on the overtuned bucket, staring at the ceiling like it might give him permission. Those watches looked like the kind men wore in boardrooms, not in greasy garages, and those big old bills, white paper, faded ink, looked like they came from another America. Silas kept hearing one thought in his head: if this is real, somebody hid it for a reason. The next morning, he made a mistake normal people make. He didn't call a lawyer, he didn't call the police, he called family. His nephew, Trey, worked as a teller at a small bank in the next town over, and Silas trusted him the way you trust someone you watch grow up. Silas kept it vague on purpose, asking like it was just curiosity. Those old, oversized bills, do they still count? Or are they just souvenirs now? Trey laughed and said they were real money, but collectors paid more than the face value, especially if the bills were clean. Then he asked the question Silas didn't want. Where did you see them? Silas dodged. It was a joke and hung up fast, but he could already feel the damage. In a small town, questions don't stay questions for long. By the afternoon, the first ripple hit. Martha's cousin called and asked if Silas had been messing around behind the old machine shop. It wasn't an accusation, just a casual tone that carried too much knowledge. Silas played dumb, but his stomach sank. That shop didn't belong to the dead owner anymore, it belonged to the family. They stayed the paperwork, and if someone decided Silas had been on private property that didn't need guns to ruin him, they could ruin him with a signature. 2 days later, a white SUV rolled slowly past Silas' driveway that kept going. Then it came back and stopped at the mailbox like the driver was just checking an address. A man stepped out, clean jeans, tidy boots, polite smile, holding a folder like he was delivering good news. He introduced himself as Dale Rusk, the late shop owner's nephew, not a cop, not a tough guy, just a man with the kind of confidence that comes from thinking the rules are on his side. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'm letting some cleanup for the estate. We've had reports you've been taking scrap from our property. I'm not here to make a scene, I just need you to return anything you picked up so that it doesn't turn into paperwork." Silas felt his mouth go dry. Dale wasn't saying lockbox, Dale wasn't saying watches. He didn't have to. His eyes flicked once towards Silas' garage, like he was picturing what might be inside. "Look," Dale added, softer, almost friendly, "I get it. Folks are hurting, but my aunt is grieving and the estate is messy. If you hand back what you grabbed, we can all forget this." He left a card on Silas' porch rail and walked away like he'd done Silas a favor. That night, Silas opened the lockbox again with shaking hands. The watches stared back like cold little faces. The bills looked even older under the garage light. He could almost hear Dale's voice saying paperwork. And he knew what that meant. A complaint, a trespass story, a town full of side-eyes. Silas wasn't scared of a fight. He was scared of losing the one thing he still had, his name. He sat there until his knees ached, thinking about Martha's hearing aid, about the truth, about the tractor that kept dying at the worst times. Then he made a decision that felt ugly and necessary at the same time. He pulled his welding gear closer, set the lockbox on the bench, and whispered to the empty garage. If they want it back, they're getting it back. And as the first bright spark jumped from his torch, Silas realized he wasn't fixing metal anymore. He was building a lie strong enough to save his life. Silas worked like a man racing a clock, only he could hear. He pulled the watches and the old bills out first, wrapped them in shop rocks, and slid them into the false bottom of his old tackle box, the one nobody ever touched because it smelled like creek, mud, and rust. Then he filled the lockbox with the ugliest scraps he could find: rusty bolts, a busted starter, a chunk of chain, heavy enough to feel real when you lift it. He poured used motor oil over everything until it looked ruined, then he welded the lid shut in a way only a mechanic would. Clean beads, no gaps, no easy cut line. When he was done, the lockbox looked like a sealed disaster, like the kind of thing you toss into the bed of a truck and forget. Dale Ross came back the next morning with the same polite smile and the same folder, acting like this was all going to end with Silas looking embarrassed. Silas carried the lockbox out with both hands and set it on the porch like a dead weight. "Here," he said. "Found it behind the dumpster. It was already a mess. I welded it shut so it wouldn't leak oil in my truck. You can have it." Dale's eyes lit up for half a second before he covered it with a nod. He tried to lift it and grunted, surprised by the weight. That was the moment Silas knew the lie worked. Dale didn't open it there. He couldn't. He just stood a little straightener, like he'd won something, and said, "Appreciate you doing the right thing." Then he drove off with the welded box in his SUV, probably already picturing what he'd buy when he cracked it open. Silas didn't celebrate. He didn't even tell Martha the full story yet. He waited until night when the house was quiet and the wind stopped pushing at the loose shingles. Then he laid the watches and the bills on the kitchen table and watched Martha's face change. First confusion, then fear, then a soft, trembling kind of hope she didn't want to trust. "Is it ours?" she whispered. Silas didn't say yes. He said the only honest thing: "It's our chance." And for the first time in a long time, she didn't argue about what was right in theory. She just reached across the table and held his hand, like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. He moved smart after that, quiet, slow, and in pieces. No big payday that would make people talk, no local buyer who knew Dale's cousin or Martha's aunt. Silas drove 2 towns over to a weekend collectors show at a fairground where old men in ball caps traded coins and watches the way other folks traded fishing stories. He sold 1 watch first, then a small stack of those large old bills to a paper money dealer who didn't blink, just nodded like he'd been waiting for something like this all months. A few weeks later, he sold another watch, then another, and every time he came home he put the cash away, let it sit overnight, and only then paid what mattered most. Not once, pressure. The best part came from a place he didn't expect. With the pressure off, Silas stopped sounding like a beaten man on the phone. One Sunday he called his son, just called, no speech, no guilt, said, "I'm fixing up the place, come by the next weekend if you want, I'll grill." There was a pause on the line, the kind that holds years inside it, and then his son said, "Yeah, we'll come." When the truck finally pulled into Silas' driveway the next Saturday, Two grandkids climbed out behind it, taller than Silas remembered, awkward and curious. Martha stepped onto the porch with her new hearing aids, and for a second she just listened to their voices like it was music. That night, Silas sat on his porch with Martha, the house quiet in the best way, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like defeat. He didn't feel like a hero, he felt like a man who finally got one clean breath after years of holding it. He looked at his hands that had fixed other people's machines for the whole life, and realized he'd finally use them to fix his own life too. Sometimes, Silas thought you don't beat the system by being louder than it. You beat it by staying calm, thinking like a mechanic, and taking your miracle in small, careful pieces until it turns into something real. So this is the story. Please share in the comments, how do you feel about the story, what are your thoughts, and if you like the video, please give me the thumbs up and subscribe.